Okay, thanks everybody, and good morning, and thanks for coming out to the event today. My name is Will Dempster. I'm the Executive Director of the China Trade Task Force. We're here today because illegal Chinese subsidies have brought the American aluminum industry to the brink of extinction. This is not hyperbole. If China continues to distort and manipulate the global aluminum market, all remaining aluminum smelters in the United States will be forced to close in the next 6 to 9 months. The American people understand the stakes here. In a new national poll the task force released this morning in conjunction with Morning Consult, more Americans consider Chinese market manipulation and job hacking to be a greater threat to the American economy than Chinese cyber hacking. And a full 92% of Americans believe it is important that we maintain our domestic production capabilities for critical resources like aluminum. We have a clear imperative. If the U.S. government acts decisively, we can save tens of thousands of high-paying, family-supportive jobs and safeguard our national security. And by acting decisively, we can send China a strong and unambiguous message that the United States will not tolerate the hacking of American jobs. I am pleased today to be joined by 3 distinguished panelists for a robust discussion on how to solve the challenges we face. Former Senate Majority Leader Trent Lott, the CEO of Century Aluminum, Mike Bless, and former Undersecretary of Commerce for International Trade Grant Aldonas. Now, before we begin our discussion, I would like to draw everybody's attention to the screen for a short documentary film that the task force filmed at Century Aluminum's Hawesville, Kentucky facility. And I would say that this documentary really shows poignantly the human impact and the human cost of Chinese job hacking.
I believe China's stealing our jobs, no doubt. You know, they found the loophole to where they don't have to pay taxes and whatnot. And for us to be impacted exactly like that, it's unfair.
China cheats, America loses. But every time.
This facility has helped me and my family especially. I was able to buy our first house because I got a job here, buy new vehicles.
The Century facility is one of our top employers. They are certainly a big part of the fabric of the economy we have here in Hancock County. Everyone in the region is going to feel the impact.
Everything you see around you, the refractory and the pits beside you, it's not just the loss of the jobs in these smelters, it's the folks that sell us this refractory and sell us the axles and wheels on these trolleys. It's everything here. It's not measured in the thousands, it's the tens of thousands of support jobs that goes into running smelters in the U.S.
If you're from Hawesville, either you know somebody who works here, or your family works here, or you work here.
China is not playing by the rules. When you circumvent a tax ruling with a product that is not what is portrayed to be to get it into the country, then we're not all playing on the same field. The need for American metal is increasing, yet we're put out of business or are struggling to stay in business because of the pressure that outside metal puts on coming into this country. Solely relying on outside resources for something so precious, in my opinion, is a very big risk. Fighter jets to trains to automobiles, airplanes, it's everything that we see. This smelter that we're standing in is one of a very small handful of high purity smelters in the world, and we're at risk of losing it.
We have to have the backing from Washington to preserve the jobs that we do have left in this industry here in the United States.
The American government absolutely needs to stand up to China. That's what this nation was founded on, was standing up for your rights, for the people in the nation. They're letting China be the aggressor, be the bully.
Mr. President, American aluminum jobs are in jeopardy. American workers' jobs and livelihood is in jeopardy, and we're pleading with you for help. Before it's too late, before all of these smelters, this smelter and the rest of these smelters are a thing of the past.
And so we'll start our discussion today with opening remarks from each of our panelists. Afterwards, I will start the conversation by asking our panelists a couple of questions. And finally, we'll then open the floor to some questions from the audience. And so first, it's my pleasure to introduce Senator Trent Lott. Senator Lott represented the people of Mississippi in Congress for 35 years and was first elected to the U.S. House of Representatives in 1973. From 1981 to 1989, Senator Lott served as the House Minority Whip, the second-ranking Republican in that august body. In 1988, Senator Lott was elected to his first six-year term in the U.S. Senate and ascended to the position of Senate Majority Leader in 1996. After retiring from public service in 2007, Senator Lott has gone on to have a successful career in the private sector here in Washington. And so, Senator Lott, thank you so much for joining us, and please, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much for the very kind and short introduction. I appreciate that. In spite of having been the Senate Majority Leader, I will not filibuster you today. But I'm pleased to be here to discuss an issue that I think is of great importance to American economy, but also has significant national security ramifications. Just a minute more about my own background. My dad was a pipe fitter in a shipyard, a union member in Pascagoula, Mississippi. We've been building ships for commercial companies and for the Navy and Coast Guard for years and years. And so I was intimately familiar with destroyers and cruisers and multipurpose amphibious warships. And one of the things people don't realize is that a lot of the infrastructure, the top of ships now, is aluminum in that shipyard. And when I came to Congress, I guess I had a little bit of a protectionist streak in me with the background I had. But as I studied issues and got more and more involved in international relations and trade in particular, I developed into very much of a free and fair trader. As a member of the Senate, I voted for every free trade agreement, bilateral or multilateral, that was considered during my 19 years in the Senate. I did have some reservations at the end of my career about the South Korean bilateral trade agreement, which some of the problems were worked out, and I eventually supported it too, but by then I'd left the Congress. So I've been very much involved in trade for a long time, and I do think it's in the world's interest, everybody's interest, that we have trade agreements, we have free trade, but it's got to be fair. You got to have rules that everybody has to play by. And if you don't play with those rules and comply with world agreements that you have joined into, that creates a problem which has to be addressed. And there are a lot of ways that can be done. First of all, by engaging a country or a party that might be offending the trade agreements of the world, or trade relationships. So I just wanted to point out that background. But the second thing is aluminum is an important part of our economy. It creates jobs, over 10,000, and brings in about $6 billion. But it is a very important primary metal, and one that is growing in importance militarily and domestically. To take it a step further about how this is kind of personal to me, my son lives in Kentucky. So I follow everything that happens in Kentucky, not just horse racing or good bourbon. I pay attention to jobs in Kentucky too. I have to drive and enjoy driving a Nissan product, but I have to confess, I have a brand new Ford F-150. And as you know, the main part of the body is aluminum. So this is really personal for me. And it troubles me when you have countries around the world that do start breaking the rules with subsidies and all kinds of ways of supporting an industry in their country that leads you to unfair competition. And this is not something I just whine about. I've been to China, and I sat down with the finance minister in China. We had a very interesting discussion. We were mostly talking about, at that time, currency manipulation and how we could have more trade. But it was very striking to me because we had a Senate delegation, and the meeting with the finance minister in the Great Hall, right behind him was a bust of Mao Zedong. And I thought, this is ironic. We're sitting here and we're talking about trade and currency, but it was a very interesting, sometimes heated conversation. But I do think this is a very important issue. Most Americans are probably not aware of how important aluminum is. So I think to deal with this issue, number one, we got to make more people aware that this is a very important industry for us in so many ways. And then we've got to make sure people understand there is a problem here. And then we have to find solutions. And they're out there. But you just have to engage, tell your story, and work to get a result.
Thank you, Senator. I next would like to introduce Mike Bless, the CEO of Century Aluminum. Mike joined Century in 2006 as Executive Vice President and Chief Financial Officer and assumed his current position in 2011. Earlier in his career, Mike worked for Rockwell International Corporation and its successor, Rockwell Automation, where he held the title of Senior Vice President and Chief Financial Officer. He began his career as an investment banker with Dillon Read and Company. Mike, I look forward to hearing your remarks.
Well, thank you very much. And I'd like to extend my thanks to the Senator and to the Secretary. We're grateful that you're here. And I'd like to go into a bit more detail, but frankly, Senator Lott made the case here extraordinarily well and eloquently. And so with that, I'd just like to get into a little bit more detail. What we have here, as the Senator said, is an industry that's key to the U.S. economy. And unlike some industries where we have perhaps similar trade situations and the dynamics in certain of those other industries might be challenged or difficult, as the Senator again said, we've got a vibrant and growing industry here. Just to give you a sense, demand in this country for primary aluminum, and by the way, there's only 3 producers of primary aluminum left in the USA. My company is one of them. We have operations in Kentucky, as the Senator said, in South Carolina, and we regrettably just took the decision to close a plant in Jackson County, West Virginia, where that employment is direly needed. So to go back, we've got an industry that's growing in this country at about 7% a year. Think of that. It's more than double the GDP in this country that the demand is growing. So we've got a vibrant market that needs the product. And as you saw, Jared Brooks, our plant manager at one of the Kentucky plants, that's in Hawesville, Kentucky, and the Senator said as well, one of the key applications here, he mentioned a couple of them, the Senator did, is national defense, number one. Let me just give you a relevant fact there. There are, as Jared said, my plant manager, there are 2 plants in the world that can make the type of, it's known as high purity aluminum that are required, for example, for the F-35 platform and for the armor that protects our troops, both on their body armor and the tank armor. One is our plant in Hawesville, Kentucky, and the other is in the Persian Gulf. It's in Dubai. So if our plant in Kentucky, which is only operating at 40% capacity today, given the environment, the situation about which we're here to talk about, were to shut, our military would be sourcing all of that high purity aluminum from that plant in Dubai. It's the only other one in the world that makes that product in quantity, in reliable quantity. So that's what we're talking about here. Senator talked about automotive as well, Ford F-150, and the entire industry is moving in that direction, as we all know, given the CAFE rules and similar legislation in this country and in Europe. So we've got a vibrant industry that's growing well, that competes around the world in every product area, in every cost area, I should say, would be in fine shape today other than one issue that we'll talk about, and that's the illegal subsidies that are being given to these plants in China. And that's what we're here today to discuss, and that's what needs to come to an end. Just to, again, set the stage a little bit more, I'm going to give you a little bit of data here so you can appreciate the situation. Looking at China, their primary aluminum industry, until a couple years ago, was growing well. It was their demand growth was close to 20% a year. It was growing at about 18% a year. So very heavy demand growth. Again, 2 times GDP, 2.5 times GDP, really nice. And their growth in new supply to counter that. Obviously, they need their own supply to feed their own industry, was growing at about 10 or 11%. So that sounds good. 18% demand growth, 11% supply growth, all's well. Starting a couple years ago, those dynamics were changed significantly. In fact, they fell flat on their face, and here's what happened. Obviously, as we've all seen, general economic activity in China is slowing, the pace of it, I should say. And so that 18% growth that we were seeing in their domestic demand a couple years ago is now at 5 to 6%. So it's gone from 3 times GDP to roughly equal to their rate of economic growth if they're around a 6-ish% GDP growth today. Conversely, that 10 or 11% supply growth is today just shy of 20%. So at the same time their demand has collapsed, they've throttled down and increased their supply meaningfully. And this is what's caused the problem. This has produced a couple million tons, 3 million tons today to be precise, of excess capacity in China. They've got too much capacity to suit their own needs. And let me give you an example of what's going on here. Again, it's illegal subsidies that are, and this is being talked about very openly. Let me give you an example. First, the subsidies are across the board. The principal subsidies are coming in the area of reduced prices and subsidies for electric power, which is by far the most important cost of running an aluminum smelter. About 40% of the cost of one of these plants is electric power. So I'll give you an example. There were 3 plants, and this is just one anecdote, because it's a timely one, that were announced for closure in China earlier this year, aggregating to about 750,000 tons of capacity. Just to put it in context, it's a 60 million ton global market, so 750,000 tons is significant, right? A couple weeks ago, each of those 3 plants, 3 separate plants, announced that they had received subsidies from the respective provincial governments, and those plants were no longer going to shut. So it's got 750,000 tons. The subsidies are reported to be in the hundreds of millions of dollars a year in aggregate. And you've got that amount of capacity. This is part of the 3 million tons of excess that was deemed by its owner to be non-economic, but that's going to be supported by these illegal subsidies. So that's a very relevant case in point and very temporal. This is just within the last couple of weeks. There are plenty of other examples, and the new building continues apace. So that's the situation. The result has been predictable. Exports from China of all aluminum have skyrocketed over the last couple of years. The data are as follows. Over the last 3 years, starting in 2012, ending with the industry forecast for this year, exports will triple from slightly over 1 million tons to just shy of 4 million tons. That's a 40% annual growth rate. And the predictions, given the new capacity that's coming on, that's rumored to be, that's announced that's coming on, that is physically coming on, is that rate will at least continue and will likely increase. You got 40% growth in the exports coming out of China. What's been the impact of that? It's been very predictable in the U.S. And here's the problem today, and here's why it's stark, and here's why it's immediate. And this is why we need immediate help in terms of some of the remedies about which the senator spoke. Starting this year, just to size it, the U.S. aluminum industry is about 5 million tons a year. We consume 5 million tons of this stuff per year in this country. Beginning at the beginning of this year, we were producing as a country 1.7 million tons only. So this is a commodity that for decades has been in short supply in the USA. We've always imported this stuff from around the world. Of that 1.7 million tons, due to the precipitous drop in the price brought on by this excess supply and the exports, 1 million of that 1.7 million tons has either been shut this year or has been announced by its owners that it will be shut within the first month or 2 of 2016. So we're going to be down from 1.7 million to 700,000 tons in this country against 5 million tons of demand. And each of the owners, 3 companies, as I said, one of which is mine, operating these plants, have said that the remaining plants, there are 4 left in this country, are slated for at risk of imminent closure if the situation persists. So we need immediate help. As the senator said, there are tools available to our government to be able to address illegal and unfair trade. That's all we seek is fair trade. We believe the administration is aware of the issue. We've spoken with them. Others have spoken with them. We think they understand. The question is how quickly a fix can be sought. Because the problem is here, it's now, it's growing, it's not going to go away. Thank you, Will.
Thanks, Mike. And finally, I'd like to introduce Grant Aldonas. Mr. Aldonas currently serves as a senior advisor at the Center for Strategic and International Studies here in Washington, and is the principal managing director of Split Rock International, a Washington, D.C.-based consulting and investment advisory firm. From 2001 to 2005, he served in the administration of George W. Bush as the Commerce Department's Undersecretary for International Trade, where he was one of the president's principal advisors on international economic policy. Prior to his service in the administration, Mr. Aldonas was Chief International Trade Counsel to the Senate Finance Committee, served as a Foreign Service Officer with postings including the Office of the U.S. Trade Representative, and also worked in private practice as an international trade attorney for many years. Mr. Aldonas, thank you very much for coming today.
Thank you, Matt. Well, first, I want to build on what first my good friend Senator Lott has said and what Mike has said in making three very straightforward points. I'm here as the trade guy. My comments aren't going to be aluminum specific until we get to the Q&A, because I like what Mike was saying, and certainly what Senator Lott was saying about the need for aluminum. And implicit in that is an inability of us really to draw together the threads of our economic objectives and our national security strategy, which we need to be thinking harder about that across the board. But let me stick with trade for the moment. I'm a free trader. I don't feel obliged to qualify it as fair trade. The point is that free trade is about letting the market decide outcomes. It's about letting the market decide who the innovators are and who has access to capital. And when governments interfere with that, everybody loses. So I don't feel any need to apologize as a free trader for saying you have to address what China's doing, because it undermines the ability of the outcome we want from free trade. Now, that's both economic and political. Economically, you lose the benefit of very competitive U.S. firms that are innovators in the marketplace, that are essential to employing a lot of people here. But the point is, they benefit from a market that is open and highly competitive, and they are required to compete. And as a consequence, they're at the top of their game. That's unlike, as Mike was referring to, Chalco, the largest supplier in the Chinese market, which is the Aluminum Corporation of China, which is famously was supposed to be closing its facility in North Gansu province, but as a result of a sweetheart deal with the local province is now going to keep it open. It is the classic example of how a government intervenes in this. Now, why do I say it's complicated politically? Look, if you're interested in passing the Trans-Pacific Partnership, which is going to face its own challenges, as every trade bill always does, without the support of folks like the majority leader here, but the reality is, if you don't keep faith with American entrepreneurs and the American worker in what you do, not only with your trade policy, but the other economic policies that support what they're trying to achieve, you can't pass that initiative that does move us in the right direction. So what I know after 40 years of dealing with this in Washington is that big things are at risk unless we step up now to address the problems that not only aluminum is facing, there's a number of industries facing this at this point, but we have to act. Now, second point I want to make is that we've seen this picture before. Twice, actually, in my time in Washington. First time was in the 1980s. We saw the fallout in the steel and other industries from the heavy state involvement in the 1950s, 1960s, and 1970s. You recall British Steel was the combination and nationalization of 7 loss-making operations, keeping them afloat and driving half of the U.S. steel industry out of business. In the 1990s, what we saw as a result of the Cold War and the implosion of the Soviet bloc economy was all that excess capacity spilling onto the market that needed to be addressed because competitive firms that were innovators were again under pressure. And the question is, who bears the burden of adjustment? And at this point, what you see with China as it's slowing down, as it's trying to climb off the back of the tiger it's been riding, which has been public investment in infrastructure, largely in real estate. What you're looking at them is trying to export the costs and the burdens of their economic adjustment to the United States. That's what those additional exports that Mike referred to mean. That's what they imply from the point of view, not just of the aluminum industry, but of the American consumer, the American worker, and American companies generally. And what we need to be careful about is whether we've learned the lessons from the 1980s and 1990s and are willing to act preemptively to ensure that doesn't happen again. Now look, there's an awful lot of policies that could help us become more competitive because our firms and workers do face the challenge of competing in a global economy. My view as a trade guy, the biggest trade obstacle we face right now is actually our tax code.
We know that.
Right?
Absolutely.
But the point is that all these policies have to work and complement each other. And unless we're doing what we're supposed to on the trade side to blunt the ability of China to export the economic adjustment here, we're not only losing economically, but we're losing the ability to keep the process of moving toward trade liberalization further. The last point I want to make is a fairly straightforward one. It's about the WTO. Senator Lott showed unbelievably great leadership in moving legislation that allowed us to normalize trade relations with China. And I don't apologize for wanting China in the WTO because we're better off with them in the system of rules.
I agree.
Now, having said that, if we fail to enforce those rules, it's a breach of faith with the people who supported the passage of the WTO and China PNTR, and it's a breach of our obligation to follow through on the kind of commitments we make to both American entrepreneurs and American workers. And here I just want to add a wonky footnote about the WTO rules. The way the WTO works is two ways, and we tend to forget this in the debate. There's a series of rules that address specific actions or practices by governments, like subsidies, like what state-owned enterprises can do, how they can participate in the market. China's policies violate those. But more broadly, the WTO also includes something called nullification and impairment. It is when a series of policies cohere in a way that undermines the reasonable expectation you had when you sat down across from the Chinese at the negotiating table about the commercial circumstances. That's what China's policies are upsetting. We have in the past acted against the EU, a number of other places, to try and address this within the framework of the WTO. Frankly, the President and the folks at USTR need to be taking those steps now, because now it's not just a question of China. It's a question about the fabric of the WTO rules. And that does mean that the system, from which we benefit enormously in terms of the trade rules, is at risk unless you're regularly trying to take care of these problems in the marketplace. Thanks.
Very well done. May I jump back in here?
Absolutely,
just a minute?
Senator.
One nexus that I think we must make here is that at a time when our energy costs are way below what they are in China, because of these subsidies that are occurring, it's forced the price for aluminum to the lowest it's been since the Great Recession, which I guess we would say, what, 2008? Yes, and that's what's driving the cause of us to lose jobs and plants having to shut down. So the nexus there is the way it has forced down the price. But you talked about being a trade guy. You know, things like this can be worked out, and I was involved in a lot of instances where we were doing that. We had a problem one time when I was still in the Senate with Russia not letting our chicken parts get into Russia. They had a boatload of chicken, dark meat, from my home state of Mississippi sitting off the coast of St. Petersburg, and they wouldn't let it in. Well, I was with the Senate delegation meeting with Lavrov, the foreign minister. He was very articulate and very tough, and so the conversation led to a pretty heated debate about my chicken parts off the coast of St. Petersburg. And he was getting mad, and I was getting mad. And everybody else was sitting there looking like, okay, what's going to happen? Finally, he stopped and he said, well, at least we're arguing over chicken legs instead of missiles. And it cut the ice. We worked it out. The chicken parts came in, and but we were able to solve it. I had a problem in years gone by, and you'll remember this, with Canadian lumber coming into America. And we wound up having a huge fight over that, which we eventually found a solution. The one that was the funniest, I got involved because we brought in Dole and Chiquita bananas into the Port of Gulfport. I got involved in a fight with Europe over bananas. Somebody said, you've gone bananas. I wound up in the Capitol nose to nose with Tony Blair because President Clinton had imposed tariffs on, among other things, Scottish cashmere. Now, in Scotland, you don't mess with cashmere, maybe not in Ireland either. But he was giving me a hard time about the list of things that the president came up with. And I said, well, I didn't select that. But I said, you know, Mr. Prime Minister, the problem really is not Great Britain. It's down there in, I guess, Portugal and Spain at the time. And you could help resolve it. End of the story. He got involved. We found a solution. Bananas could get in better. And thank goodness Scottish cashmere continues to come into the United States. Here's the point. We have difficulties with our trading partners. whether they, whether they are, unilateral type arrangement, or whether it's Europe, or whether it's in Asia. But you can work it out. There's a problem now with the subsidies that are going to the aluminum industry. It's having a very negative impact in America. We need to engage and work this out.
Thanks, Senator. So I'll just ask our panelists a couple of questions to get started. The first one, I guess, would be for you, Mike, and then for you, Grant, if you want to chime in as well. In 2003, Chinese aluminum production represented about 20% of global production, and today it represents 55%. If the subsidies remain in place, if this situation continues, do you see an upper limit for that growth, and what kind of impact will that have on our national security and our economy?
Sure, Will. Our view is that there are other regions in the world that will continue to produce this metal, no doubt. But you can see the U.S. industry wiped out under your conditions, i.e. if the subsidies were to persist. Western Europe has said the same. The situation is just as acute there, and you've seen the actions there as well. Same is happening in Central and South America as well. Australia, South Africa, all of these markets are at risk. And so is there a natural limit? I suppose at some point there is, but is there room for them to grow if these subsidies persist? Absolutely. And they will, because there's nowhere else for the metal to go.
Yeah, I think the most striking thing to me, looking at it from the outside, is, again, we have a capital-intensive industry. The impact on prices of this excess capacity slapped into the market starts to starve competitive firms of capital. And so the innovators in the marketplace are losing out to the folks who, frankly, don't represent the cutting edge of what this industry can produce, not just for the United States, but for the world. But we shouldn't be sacrificing that, with all the implications for both our economy and for security, in the face of what are clear violations of the WTO. But that's the point, really, is very capital-intensive industry. We have not been wise in the past at trying to preempt the sorts of things that have this kind of impact on our industry.
If I may, the Secretary is right on point. If one were to look at, we're right in the middle of our business planning for next year. If one were to look at our R&D and CapEx, capital expenditure budgets directly to this point, so he's right on point. They've been decimated. It's a tragedy, too, given the projects, the modernization projects that have and can continue to increase the efficiency of these plants. And they dollar out, as the Senator said. He made an extraordinarily important point about energy prices in this country. They are conducive to making this material in this country. We've improved the efficiency of these plants and can continue to do so, but not under this environment where, as we've discussed, the commodity prices collapse due to what's going on.
Actually, if I could add, Matt, Mike, what you're saying is, I think, one of the things that people don't understand in Washington is how everything comes down to that capital budgeting decision, where somebody's got to face the CFO and convince him that the return on investment is worth putting the dollars in.
Yes, sir.
And guess what? In China, you don't have to do that. That's the difference. And until we address that fundamental problem, what we're doing is putting the folks at risk who are making those sorts of choices on behalf of their firms and their workers.
I'll put it in stark, if I may, just one more, Will, one more data point. Let me just put it in stark detail. We've shared all these data with our investors, of course, so this is all public information. Our budget for capital expenditures, most of which, in addition to safety and environmental compliance, goes to projects, we call them return projects, so they increase the efficiency of the plant. They have IRRs. Was $80 million in 2015. It'll certainly be below $20 million in 16, and maybe a good deal below $20 million.
Let me put another twist on this, too. It's not as if America doesn't make mistakes also. Congress has insisted on a thing called COOL, Country of Origin Labeling. And now we're in some hot water about it, and Canada and Mexico are putting some restrictions on our products, which is beginning to have an impact, whether it's on chocolate or rice from America. We have to work that out. So, I mean, it goes both ways, where people do, go to improper lengths to try to control something. And I think we have to act on that. But I think today, as we sit here, and for what has happened in Paris, I mean, the elephant in the room is here with us. We saw what can happen, and we see how we're all going to be impacted by this. And that then ties into this. This product is such a key product, a primary product for our military and our national security, We cannot have something as critical as this metal being controlled or dominated by one country that may have different values from us in a lot of areas. So, not that there is a direct relationship to terrorism, but it's a time when we certainly should be thinking about security across the board.
Thank you. Senator Lott, the next question is for you. Obviously, we're in the middle of a presidential campaign right now. Candidates in both parties are talking. They're making pretty tough pronouncements about the threat China poses to our economy and our national security. But they've been doing it in a very general sense. If you could have any advice for the candidates on this issue, what would that be? Particularly for those in your own party.
Be careful would be my first word of advice. But they're going to get into this area. Just as this week, it's going to be dominated by terrorist attacks. And what are we doing to be able to prevent that sort of thing from happening? What is going to be our program on refugees and immigration? And it'll tie right into our own national security. And I think when you have a presidential debate, as important as trade is to the world and to the United States, a really responsible debate would require the candidates to talk about this, how they would improve on where we are in the world, and talk about how can we do a better job with this energy advantage we have, but also continue to expand and improve the cooperation and the trade between countries of the world. A lot of the disasters we see, if you trace their beginning back, it really quite often has to do with the economy and poverty and disenfranchised people, and we better pay attention to that, and our candidates pay attention to it. I wish they'd get off of calling each other names and start talking about substance for a change.
Absolutely.
I should have run, but my wife said, we've been married 50 years. How would you like to get a divorce? I said, okay. So I guess that ended that. But trade is so important. And I really came over from the House of Representatives a novice. This is not something I grew up with. It's not something I studied in college or law school. My emphasis was much more maritime law, which does relate to this. But as I got in the Senate, I found the Senate is very different from the House in that the Senate is forced to get into international policy and trade because, first of all, confirmation, you have to confirm these people, secretaries of state and so forth. Treaties, principal responsibility is in the Senate. It all begins in the Senate. And I started getting requests to meet with leaders from around the world. I didn't want to do it. And my staff said, if you're going to be majority leader, you have to do it. Because when they come here, they want to meet with the president, the secretary of defense, the speaker of the House, and the majority leader of the Senate. And so I started meeting with leaders from around the world, not just Europe and Asia like we always do, but Central and South America. We got involved in CAFTA and NAFTA and the Aegean trade, and I learned an awful lot about how important those trade relations are to countries all over the world, not just America, but to Colombia, to Jordan or Korea. And it works when it is free trade, and the people benefit. But when you begin to develop a problem, if you ignore it, then it grows into a much bigger problem. That's where we're headed with aluminum, in my opinion, if we don't find a way to get this straightened out.
Actually, it's an interesting point, Senator Lott, because the growth you were describing in your own perspective, we always benefited, I know, from the perspective of the Finance Committee when we did steer foreign leaders your way so that you could talk to them with a homespun analogy. It would bring it home to them as politicians, what was going on and why we had a problem and how we needed to address it. What's missing actually in the political debate now is a little bit of the same thing, to be honest with you, to be able to talk about what's going on in our economy and the global economy in a way that people who do feel disenfranchised can relate to.
Sure.
And having a debate about currency when currency is not the principal issue here, right? And trying to relate this, like Jared was in the film clip, directly to the guy on the street. My favorite aphorism, which I think is yours, about politics was if you're going to take the people's money, put it in the streets where they can see it.
Yeah.
Right?
Right.
And there's an equivalent thing here of saying if you're going to talk about trade policy, you got to talk about right where the rubber hits the road politically. People talk about currency, but the reality is these policies that have a big impact on American industry and workers is what needs to be the topic of the discussion.
Sure, and Mike, just one last question for you. I know you mentioned it in your remarks, and some people might say that, there are a number of things we can do, but do you believe that the tools that the administration has at its disposal can solve this problem? And if so, how quickly do they need to act?
You've answered. First part of the question, the answer is firmly believe it. The remedies are there. The tools are in the toolbox, however one wants to talk about it, absolutely. You've asked the right, Will, second part of the question, can it be done quickly enough? Because this situation is going to persist. The fundamentals exist for it to persist or worsen, and it needs to be addressed immediately. We think yes, with some immediacy, but it needs to happen now, and that's why we're here.
Let me try and reinforce that with a homespun analogy.
Thank you.
Jackie Robinson stole home, right? He made the game revolve around his initiative.
Yeah.
What we need here is someone to steal home, to be honest with you, right? Make everybody understand that there's something at play based on our actions, because that's what sets up the conversation to solve the problem.
Yep.
So you make use of the tools, not always suspecting that you're going to get everything you want out of the use of the tools. The tools are designed to set up the conversation. And that's what we have to see from the administration at this point, frankly.
And by the way, I do a lot of work now with the Bipartisan Policy Center. I guess I'm more bipartisan now than I was when I was in the Congress. But I think the record would show we found a way to get things done, even when we had the Congress that was Republican in those days for a lot of the time, and Bill Clinton was the president. We found a way to get a result, even though we were dealing with tough things, 9/11, an anthrax attack, and an evenly divided 50-50 Senate, and an impeachment trial. But in the process, we got welfare reform. We also cut taxes, balanced the budget, had a surplus, passed safe drinking water, portability insurance, built highways, passed telecommunications reform. We raised military pay. We made it work. But also in this area, I think it's important to note that we got a lot of these trade agreements through the leadership of President Bill Clinton, and George W. Bush, and Daddy Bush. Presidents have, and administrations have, sometimes reluctantly, but they have weighed in to help us solve a multiplicity of problems that support free trade. And this administration can and must do it here.
Got to steal home so people know you can do it.
That's right.
At this time, if there's any questions from the crowd, anybody would like to ask a question for one of our panelists?
Thank you. My name's Adam B. Sudi. I'm with Politico. Can anyone on the panel explain sort of specifically in the near term what action the administration can take, either through a trade remedy case or a WTO case, or, maybe it's broader, like you were saying, diplomatic solution that can be done now to solve this problem, which seems to be very pressing? And was there any sense that, as APEC is wrapping up today, and then the presidents in Asia, was there any indication that this topic came up when he was talking to leaders, Chinese leaders specifically?
I don't believe it was on the agenda, and it should have been. Every one of these issues, frankly, steel, a number of others, should have been on the deck in the conversations. And it's a classic example of trying to set something up. There is a case to be made. And as soon as at USTR you start to articulate what the boundaries are that you think have been violated, you make that public so that the other side knows what's coming. Because you're trying to generate the conversation that Senator Lott was talking about. And this is very practical, nuts and bolts stuff for those of us who do this in Washington. You're looking for that action-forcing event like APEC was, where the leaders are going to come together. You want these tools moving and being used, so you generate the conversation when they come together. So right now, you'd need to be looking at when's the next time we're going to see the two leaders together? Or when are we going to see the Secretary of Commerce and the Secretary of Treasury in the next round of the JCCT and the SEC talks? When are we going to have a point where they're together with the Chinese leadership the way Senator Lott was, so that the moves that are going on in the process are setting it up so the conversation can find a constructive solution? That's really what you're trying to do at this point. But the case is there to be made. And I have to say, this is a little bit like litigation anywhere. You have to bring the case to test the proposition, either that the tools will work or to illustrate where they don't and where the system needs to be fixed. And that's what you have to do here.
I can't improve on that except to say part of the process is just to make people in general and our leaders in particular aware of what's happening.
Exactly.
I mean, there's so many things happening in the world now. There's so many hot spots and so many challenges. There's always one issue like this can get lost in the shuffle. So we're trying to raise a profile here. It should be addressed by our leaders of countries that might be involved in an issue like this. It should be members of Congress ought to get involved. I talked about going to China and sitting down with the finance minister years ago to talk about important things. And then you do have these other formal processes that you can go to if diplomatic and other communications fail. Then there are other steps that you can take, but you take them in order. You don't just jump with a sledgehammer. You go through a process.
No, I think you want somebody other than you waving a sledgehammer so you can have the conversation.
Absolutely. We are aware, to the Secretary's point, there is a round of JCCT going on beginning this weekend. We are aware that, or we believe that this issue will be raised by the Secretary, the Commerce Secretary and her delegation. So we're beginning to develop that kind of dialogue, we believe.
And I have to say, Secretary Pritzker is terrific.
Yeah,
She's
she
been
is.
a marvelous advocate on behalf of both American companies and American workers.
Agree without reservation.
I agree too. And she can be tough.
Yep.
She's from
Chicago.
I know. What I need to say.
There you go.
Hi. I'm Michael Rose. I'm a reporter with Bloomberg BNA. I cover these issues mainly from a labor perspective rather than a trade policy perspective. I'm wondering about the extent of the involvement of the United Steelworkers Union. I know, Mr. Bless, you had a labor dispute with them earlier this year, and I'm just sort of wondering what your relationship is with them and sort of to what extent they're involved in this issue also.
I think obviously you, in this sector and other represented sectors, you have your good times and your difficult times, and we worked through that labor dispute in one of our Kentucky plants. I think the proof in the pudding is that the United Steelworkers have joined our coalition. Last week they issued a press release saying they were joining the task force. Leo Gerard, of course the president of the International Union, wrote what we thought was a very well done letter, made the case extraordinarily eloquently. That was published earlier this week. So that I would just point you towards those statements by the USW. We believe they're all in, I suppose is a shortcut way to say it. They realize that, well, I don't have to make the case, the jobs are going away. And it's only a matter of time. We've seen this in other industries, to which the Senator and the Secretary responded. It starts here, and then it just moves its way downstream. We've seen this movie before.
Any other questions? Okay, well, thank you very much, everybody, for coming. And again, we appreciate it. And we'll just show you a quick video just to close out the event.
I believe China's stealing our jobs, no doubt.
China cheats, America loses. Every time.
If you're from Hawesville, either you know somebody who works here, or your family works here, or you work here.
Just imagine a picture of no aluminum being produced in this country.
Everyone in the United States is at risk right now.
So the ripple effect has real devastating consequences.
Mr. President, American aluminum jobs are in jeopardy. American workers' jobs and livelihood is in jeopardy, and we're pleading with you for help before it's too late, before all of these smelters, this smelter and the rest of these smelters are a thing of the past.